Welcome to Mysterious Goings On. We're going to get right to the show after these messages.
Hi, this is Sonia Iris Lozada, host of Poetic Resurrection, and you're listening to Mysterious Goings On with Alex Greenwood.
Bad things happen in bioresearch, or at least they do when it comes to the latest book with our guest, James A. Ross. I'm looking forward to speaking with James today because he's had quite an interesting life, let alone the fact that he's written some incredible work, and we're going to talk about that today. Just as a little introduction, at times in his life, he's been a Peace Corps volunteer in the Congo, a congressional staffer, and a Wall Street lawyer. It's a living, right? His debut novel, Hunting Teddy Roosevelt, won the Independent Press Distinguished Favorite Award for Historical Fiction, is a finalist for the National Indie Excellence Award for Historical Fiction, and was shortlisted for a Goethe Historical Fiction Award. His debut mystery novel, Coldwater Revenge, appeared in April 2021 and reached number 15 on the Amazon Mystery Bestseller chart. No mean feat, ladies and gentlemen. The second book in the series, Coldwater Confession, is scheduled for release in April 2022. His short fiction has appeared in numerous literary journals, and his short story, Aux Secours, was nominated for a Pushcart Prize. I don't know if I'm qualified to interview Jim Ross, but we're going to find out. Sir, welcome to Mysterious Goings On.
Well, thank you. And I can add one more award to that list. I just heard yesterday that that Coldwater Revenge won the Firebird Book Award for legal thrillers.
So cheers. Congrats.
We're on a roll. Yeah. Now, if only the book and Hunting Teddy Roosevelt had not come out during the first global bookstore shutdown since Gutenberg invented the printing press, maybe all those awards and good reviews would have turned more rapidly into sales. But we keep pushing.
Keep pushing. That's all we can do. And but it's got to be very, very encouraging for you at this stage to have all these accolades.
It is. As I tell people who listen, I wrote my first book when I was in college, and I published my first one the same year I started collecting Social Security. So it was a long hiatus. Part of it a learning curve. Like other writers, I have a trunk full of early works that probably ought to stay in the trunk. But, ultimately, if you've got that itch and you keep scratching it, you can get somewhere.
I'm totally with you on that. I've got some direct filed under D from my first couple of books I tried to write, and but they're good experiences for you. They're usually pretty, I found at least, self-referential, and probably that's part of the problem with my first two. But the thing is, as you said, you got to keep plugging, keep doing it, and your work will improve, I assume. So, well, let's talk a little bit about you, though. I'm fascinated by the lives behind great writers, behind the writers I get the privilege of speaking with here on Mysterious Goings On. And Peace Corps in the Congo, there's got to be an anecdote in there. There's got to be what led you to this. How did you find the Congo? Not literally.
It was a classic case of bait and switch. I was in college at the time. It was right after the second Arab oil embargo. And gas lines and all that good stuff of the mid 70s, and much like 2008 financial crash, the effect of the Arab oil embargoes in 1975 was that the college recruiters simply weren't showing up at campus, and but there was one guy who did, and he was the Peace Corps recruiter, and I had a conversation with him. He had the typical beard, poncho, regalia of the day. and he was set up behind a rickety card table in the student union with a poster behind him of a Pacific island with palm trees, white beach sands, you know, girls in grass skirts. And so, I struck up a conversation with him, and it was like, yeah, we'll send you there. That's Fiji. Just sign on the dotted line. And, when I finally got my papers to head off to my assignment, it turned out to be the Congo, not Fiji. And the only thing they had in common was the heat.
How long is a typical term for the Peace Corps? Is it a set number of years or a tour?
It was 2 years, although in the Congo of the mid '70s, it was as war torn back then as it is now. So my 2 year tour was interrupted twice by civil war and invasion by Cuban mercenaries coming over the border from Angola, trying to depose the then dictator. There's actually, for your listeners who would be interested, I did a Moth radio hour story on some of the adventures dealing with those Cuban-led mercenaries and so forth. And it's on my website, jamesrossauthor.com.
I love the Moth, and wow, yet another accolade there to even be selected to be part of that. I've got to ask you, since I'm a fairly regular listener, well, how was that experience to do the Moth?
It was fantastic. The Moth has a traveling troupe that visits cities around the country, including my small town of Jackson, Wyoming. But we have a cultural center here that holds about 1,000 people, so that's big enough for them to do a flyby. And when they do, they invite local authors to join them. Or in my case, they invited two, and that's how we hooked up. It's a fairly rigorous process. They don't let you show up and just start talking. They have a whole team to prep you and to get your ramblings down to their 10-minute time slot. And it took a couple of months of practice with them before they were satisfied with the product. So I give them high accolades for a very, very professional production.
Wow, I had no idea it was that lengthy. I assumed you'd say, yeah, we worked on it for a couple of days, but no.
No. They worked on it until they were happy.
Well, what I love about that, though, is obviously the Moth, they sound well done and professional, but I mean, never did I sit there and think this has been rehearsed to death. I guess that's part of the artistry of it, isn't it?
It's very difficult to get a story arc into a 10, 15-minute time slot. All the tools we have for developing, A plots and B plots and so on and so forth, compressed into a 10 to 15-minute pitch, can wind up sounding like one of those, pharmaceutical ads where they list all the possible side effects at the end. So it takes practice.
Well, and concision is an excellent skill to have as a writer as well. So that's great. But it's interesting to me, and I'm going to have to look that up. I will look on your website. And folks, don't worry about scribbling that down. It'll be in the show notes of the show here at mgopod.com. But I'll have to listen to that. Yeah, I've got a bit of a performing background myself, but I would love to just listen to it now, knowing that you really worked that hard on it, and I'm fascinated. So I'll go there. There's another interesting thing in your bio that I had to ask about, and we don't have to go too long, but you've also had a career. Your public service career also included being a congressional staffer, I believe.
Yes, and that came in handy in the Hunting Teddy Roosevelt book, because those combined my three. The three biggest things I did in my life: the experience in Africa, my experience on Capitol Hill, and my experience on Wall Street. And they all came together in setting a book in the Congo, writing about the Roosevelt's experience, and then the other main characters, J.P. Morgan, and my experience in Wall Street, brought them all together. So it's a book that really tapped into everything I had at the time, and fortunately, it seems to have been well received.
Well, let's get right into that. What is the genesis of this book? How did it come to you?
Quite by accident, but thank God for the internet and what it's done for research. I was trying to pull all these pieces together at the suggestion of my then agent, and as I'm researching um, the Congo and what characters from my time there might make an interesting book, I happened to run across um, a article in a 1909 Italian newspaper that talked about Teddy Roosevelt and his safari, and how when the ship carrying him to Africa stopped in Naples, the carabinieri there, the police, took off a passenger who had tried to stab Roosevelt with a knife.
Oh,
And I've got a decent high school education, and I never heard about that in the history books. Of course, many of us are familiar with the later assassination attempt where he was shot in the chest and famously gave that speech that it takes more than that to kill a bull moose.
Bull
Well,
Moose.
but I had never heard of a prior um, attempt on his life. So I did a lot of research, and it's just not there anywhere in English,
Oh
not in the
wow.
bios, not in the history books. I found a couple of blurbs in um, contemporaneous Italian newspapers that simply re-reported what the Naples paper reported. But it led me down a path to answer two questions. First, how come it's not in the history books?
Hmm.
How can you suppress something like a presidential assassination attempt? Who's got that power, and why would they want to do it? And then secondly, Roosevelt had just finished his second term as president at the time, and following George Washington's example, he promised to run for a third consecutive term. But underline the word consecutive. Um, he's going to a part of the world that might kill him anyway. This is before penicillin and you know cell phones, and he's off in the jungles for a year, leading the biggest safari undertaken since Stanley found Livingstone. But the chances are pretty high he may not come back. So
Hmm.
who would do such a thing? Who has the power, and why would they do it? And hunting Teddy Roosevelt is my attempt to answer both questions. I think in the case of why the story didn't make the history books is because you didn't have international press coverage back in the day, and the outfits that were big enough to American outfits anyway, were big enough to carry it, were all controlled by William Randolph Hearst,
Hmm.
who himself wanted to run for president in 1912 when Roosevelt might come back and run again. So I believe he simply suppressed the story to enhance his own chances of running for president. And if you read the news coverage at the time, the Hearst papers covered the Roosevelt safari like he was some sort of animal slaughtering buffoon, and did their best to turn him from a powerful politician into a kind of joke.
Hmm.
But on the who would kill him side, that's a little bit more interesting. My candidate is J.P. Morgan, um, but since I can't prove that, this turned out to be a fiction book rather than a nonfiction book. But Morgan and Company actually bought the 1900 convention that nominated McKinley, a
Hmm.
very pro-business politician who they had in their hip pocket. And McKinley, to do a favor to the Republican Party, took Roosevelt on as his vice president. But Roosevelt was from the opposite end of the party, the
Right.
progressives. And the folks in New York wanted him out of New York, where he was governor. And so McKinley took him on. He was going to bury him, in the vice presidential minutia. But then McKinley gets assassinated 6 months into his term, and Roosevelt brings the party in exactly the opposite direction. Morgan and Al did not get the pro-business candidate they paid for, and Roosevelt spent the next 7.5 years busting up their businesses, then called trusts.
Right. Mr. Trustbuster right there. And
There's trust
uh,
fund.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you've got that whole part of history which I find fascinating. There's all these incredible events that are going on. I mean, something fantastic like the wreck of the Titanic right around then, and you've got Upton Sinclair. You've got all these different factors coming to bear. So it must have been a very rich tapestry for you to paint on.
It was wonderful, but I have to tell you, on the marketing and sales side of pitching a book like that,
Mm-hmm.
there is a real generational shift within the publishing industry that you can't lose sight of when you assume that your audience, whether it's agents or publishers,
Right.
can even know the difference between the two Roosevelts. I
Yeah.
can't tell you the number of times that I dealt with editors or publishers who mixed up Franklin and Teddy,
Oh
who
my
had
goodness.
no idea of European politics at the turn of the century, didn't, the lead up to World War I and the preparations of Germany for it in Africa, just not something, which is a big part of the book, just not familiar to a big part of the audience, including the gatekeepers. And that gets
Yeah.
back to the Moth story. I have to tell you that I've done a lot of oral storytelling here in Jackson. We have a local contest called Cabin Fever Story Slam, and it's composed mostly of, the working age group here in the Teton Valley. And I learned from them that if I told a story that was set anywhere earlier than about 1980, I could not count on common cultural references. If I told a story set in the Vietnam War era and I was talked about Ho Chi Minh, I could see, no, nobody here knows that was the leader of Vietnam during the war. They think
Mm-hmm.
it's an entree at the local Thai restaurant. So, yeah, that helped in putting Hunting Teddy Roosevelt together. I finally clued in that I'm going to have to get some history lessons in here without slowing down the narrative, and that was almost the biggest challenge of the book: how to keep the history without ruining the music and the rhythm of the narrative.
Yeah, I had a recent guest who was an historian by trade before he became retired and became a fiction author, and he said that it's unfortunate that most Americans don't get their history from historians.
Mm.
Let's talk about let's move from there. As much as I'd love to discuss more, because TR is such a fascinating person, and that book, by the way, is as I said to you, I think offline, is going to the top of my stack. Let's talk though about Coldwater Revenge.
Yes. Yeah. Well, the story behind that one is pretty interesting. I have two sons, very close in age together. And when they're about to enter high school, their mother said to me, my worst nightmare is that they fall for the same girl. And voila, the brother detectives of Coldwater Revenge were born. In its first draft, they were bachelor brothers involved with the same woman, and all the mayhem that follows. Sadly, in the final draft, my then agent persuaded me to give one of the brothers a family, because he thought otherwise the Wall Street brother was such an uptight, unsympathetic Wall Street jerk that nobody would like him. And so give his brother a family so he can be the beloved uncle to them. And it turned out to improve the book greatly. But my first reaction was, "What do you mean he's unlikable? He's me." And not too thinly disguised. But he was right.
Well, tell us about it. What's going on here with these wonderful brothers? What's going on in this book?
Well, they're both very bright and very capable, ambitious men, but in different ways. They come from this small town that borders Canada. It's across the lake from Quebec, and with a long history of live and let live, unlawful commerce, across the waterway. It was, in the Civil War era, it was sending runaway slaves up to Canada. In the 20s, it was, liquor, and the '70s and marijuana, in the '80s, cocaine, and what have you. So it's one of those kind of towns with boats sipping back and forth. And they grew up with it because their dad was the local sheriff. And unfortunately, he had a financial interest in some of those goings on, and the brothers found out about it when he was killed. And they each took a different tack rather. The younger brother followed in his dad's footsteps and ran for election as local sheriff, and I guess everybody voted for him because he had the same name, and they might have figured it was the same. Sheriff Morgan they'd always voted for. But the other one escaped. He in the girlfriends they had in common piece, one of them was came from a well-heeled, aristocratic, intelligentsia kind of family, and the older brother went in that direction. Went off to college, did well, went to law school, did well, went to Wall Street and did well. And as the book takes place, he's coming back home to visit his family just as a murder happens. And the younger brother, who's the local sheriff, enlists his aid in helping to solve the murder, because it includes evidence of a financial fiddle in the local biotech community, and older brother is well equipped to do the kind of financial and business sleuthing that's going to help out the brother. Unfortunately, in the process, that brother, the financial whiz, begins to uncover evidence that his younger brother, the sheriff, may be complicit in the murder. Not that he did it, but that the woman that the older brother used to date and the younger brother is now philandering with may be a murderess, and she be. So it's a family drama. It's of course cultural view of the small communities that border French Quebec, and how they've had this centuries-long practice of casual law enforcement and all that goes with it. And so it's a combination: brother story, family drama, biotech, and financial fiddle. And in the end, while the mystery is solved, the difference between the brothers remains as different as chalk and cheese, and they've set up for another adventure in book 2.
Yeah,
I signed a 3-book contract with Level Best Publishers, which is a small mystery house, and have committed to delivering a book next year and the year after. We'll see if there's more, depending on how it does.
Now, would you say that one book favors the point of view of one of the brothers more than the other, the first 2 books?
I can tell you're a writer. Yes, the first book is from the point of view of the Wall Street brother. The second book is from the point of view of the cop brother. And in the third book, they're going to have their confrontation about whose lifestyle choices and ethics and way of moving through the world is the one that the family should go in. And it's not clear what the outcome is going to be.
And that second book is Coldwater Confession. So we have Coldwater Revenge and then Coldwater Confession, and your Revenge being Tom's story, and book 2, Coldwater Confession, is Joe's. Right. Let me ask you a more of a writerly question here. So you hit the jackpot. You get a 3-book deal. How did you feel? I'm sure it was euphoria and happiness and all that. Was there any trepidation about, oh my gosh, I've got to write 3 books? Or was it more like, oh my gosh, yes, I get to write 3 books?
It was neither. I have, because the first book, Hunting Teddy Roosevelt, was just out just as the bookstores were closing down for COVID. I was really focused on the marketing and sales and distribution ability of any of the publishers I might hook up with, including this mystery house. How are you handling COVID?
Yeah.
And I had been in extensive discussions with the publisher of Hunting Teddy Roosevelt about delaying the launch of the book until bookstores would open again. Given my own Wall Street background,
Right.
that seemed to me pretty fundamental. You don't launch into a black hole. And so when I got a 3-book deal with a mystery house, quick on top of that, at a time when the bookstores were still closed, and we're beginning to realize that even when they open up again, that one of the groups that could not work from home were the book printers. So the bookstores are going to open up, but the printers aren't going to have books to go into them unless you happen to be, Stephen King or somebody like that who's at the top of the list and maybe has, but for Jim Ross, getting his first books published, as I said, the same year you start collecting Social Security, you're not at the head of that list. So my reaction was all on the business side, to tell you the truth. This is great, but it couldn't be more ill-timed.
Yeah, that's not what I expected at all, but with your Wall Street background, that does make a lot of sense. Well, how do you feel now? What do you think? Because I want to ask you as a fellow writer who's trying to market work, how do you feel now about the market? How do you feel about the way things are going?
I think most of us authors, focus on the book. We've spent years sometimes getting it to a point of air quotes perfection, and feel that we've made it to the finish line. But the truth is, it's the starting line, and the next pieces of it don't come naturally to a lot of artists. The self-promotion, even the getting the agents and the publishers. But once you get to that point, there's been such consolidation in the industry that what used to be, the back office operations at many publishers that took care of, different kinds of rights and distribution and, the sales and marketing piece, they've shrunk to the point where, even the majors, but particularly in the niche publishers, they don't have the horsepower.
Yeah.
So if you're not ready, willing, and able to step up and lead, direct, quality control, and promote, your fantastic book can just disappear into the ether.
Yeah.
And so it's a side business. I write a couple hours a day and I market a couple hours a day.
Is there anything else that occupies your time? You are collecting social, I understand that, but a man as accomplished as you, I wonder are you consulting? Are you doing other things, or taking it easy?
I fill out my time with. I'm on the board of a couple of charitable organizations.
Nice.
And I live in the Teton Valley of Wyoming, where you're surrounded by, trout streams and mountains and more elk than people most of the year. So, there's plenty of outdoor activity. And,
It sounds heavenly. I've only, of course, seen photos, but it's on my list to visit there. I hate to say goodbye, but I'd like, before we do, just to ask you, what's the best way to pick up your books? Where do you want to send people to buy these wonderful books?
The one-stop shopping for my books, my newsletter, my live performances, links to my short stories, and so forth, is my website, jamesrossauthor.com. But if you want to pick up a book and have it tomorrow, Amazon's the way to go.
Indeed it is. And by the way, check out jamesrossauthor.com. I'm looking at it now. It's got a nice light blue color. It's a really nice picture there of our guest today. Links and all sorts of stuff. And the performances is right here. I'm clicking on it as we speak. The moth, everything. This is so grand. Oh, there's even YouTube. I love this. See, this is what he's talking about, listeners, fellow writers. He is actually talking the talk and walking the walk when it comes to marketing himself and getting that brand persona out there. Sir, it's been a pleasure to speak with you. I look forward, in particular, to starting with Teddy Roosevelt and moving up from there.
I appreciate the opportunity. And,
you betcha.
I look forward to hearing the live broadcast.
You betcha. All right. And don't forget, listeners, go to mgopod.com for the complete show notes, which includes all the links, and you'll find some other goodies there concerning Mr. Ross's stuff that you're going to want to check out. So check that out there again. All righty. Thanks again to our guest today, James Ross. And please get out there and get that book. And when you write that review, tell the world you heard it here on Mysterious Goings On. Thanks so much for listening to Mysterious Goings On. Don't forget we have a complete archive of all of our interviews, monologues, updates, live readings, dead readings. All of that stuff is available at mgopod.com. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to us so you never miss an episode. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the usual suspects. Please join us there. Again, don't forget, mgopod.com also has links where to find me on social media and how to get in touch in case you want to be a guest here on the show. Well, I think it's time that I move on for this week, but until next time, keep reading.